All right. So now, since we are talking about uh, talking to a database, running some queries, getting certain data, so you need Python doesn't come with that support. And obviously, there are different databases, and Python doesn't support all the databases. Now, if we have to talk to PostgreSQL, for example, what is the database that we used? We will be using going further. Right? If we are going to use PostgreSQL. So as I told, the way you download and set up this is like, you go to PostgreSQL, then you go to this download page, right? Based on your operating system, you just select the one which you want to install. So I have it already installed, so I'm not going to install anything else. Right? If you see here, right, even here, like, there is something called third party. Third party is like, anything that is not in-house. Anybody, someone else is giving it to us, we call it as a third party. Right? These are like common terminologies when it comes to the industry software, right? So you can download it from here. You can install. See, there are several versions, 15, 14, 13. You can install any version where we should be good. Okay. Now, if you have to um, work through Python, like, what is the package that you want to install? There are several packages. There are several packages, right? But in the pretty good one is PostgreSQL. Okay, right? So whenever you want to talk to a PostgreSQL, as I told, there are like quite a lot of libraries that basically like a lot of people would have contributed, and there are quite a lot of libraries. In this, the one that we will be using would be right PyCopG2. Yeah, right. PsycopG2, right. So this is the library that we would be installing. This is the library that we would be installing because the moment you get in, right? So this it will basically tell you the number of downloads, the number of people installing it, and this is very well maintained. And we will be using this as a package to deal with the PostgreSQL. Right? How do I install pip install psychopg2? I think I have already installed it. No, not in this environment, but let me just try. Think one moment. There is another binary version. We'll install that. Right, we'll install the psychopg binary, which is much more faster than the regular one. Right, so this is how we'll be installing it. Pip install psychopg-binary. Right, after that you can use this to talk to the database. Look, let us try installing this. Right, let us wait until it completes the installation. Right, let us see. Pip freeze. Did it install? Yes, we are able to install this, and the version that we got is 3.1.10. This is the version that we have installed. Okay, let us see if we are able to import that. So, right. So, but first, let us read. How do I know what is psychobj2? Where do I do it? How do I learn what is the thing? Right. So, let us go and go to that psychobj2 website. Go to psychobj2 website. From there, we will try to understand more. Now, this is the library which basically helps us to interact with the PostgreSQL DB. Right. So obviously, if we are using that package to talk to PostgreSQL, we have to learn what functions does this psychopg provide, and how do I connect to a PostgreSQL database? How do I run a query? How do I get a response? Right. There are a lot of things that we want to understand from this. Right. Let us go one by one. Right, the first portion is obviously like the installation section where it says pip install. Here also psychopg binary they are installing, so binary is a little bit faster than the regular one. It's a C compiler. Yeah. Once after you install, so basic module usage. Okay. First thing, import psychobg, right? And then psychobg dot you have to connect to a database. So what are the different steps? Is how do you, so you all know what is SQL, right? So basically, how do you connect and execute SQL statements on the database? There is a certain database. Okay, it may be any database, right? There is database. Now, for this database, if you want to connect through any system, so basically you need three important things. One, you should know this is a service. This is a service running. So when the service is running, obviously the service will have certain IP address. The service will have certain IP address. The service will have certain port number, right? And the database, this is a PostgreSQL DB, so which can have a lot of databases within it. So if you want to connect, you should know exactly what is the DB that you want to connect. What is the database name, right? What is the user that you want to connect with, and what is the password for that user, right? You need all of this. You need all of this information. This is the step one, right? Step one is that. Step two is like, you need a package or a library where you can use that to connect to a database. So here we are using psychobj2, and within that you are using a connect method, right? And third, once you get the connection, you should get the cursor. Cursor is basically a pointer, basically helps us to run our queries, This basically gives us the connection. This gives us a way to help execute our queries in the DB, right? So you need 1, 2, 3, and then execution. And the last step is execution. You should be able to execute the query. You should be able to execute the query. Right? So these are the four important steps, right? Whenever you want to connect to any database, so these are the important steps that you have to remember, right? You have to remember so that you can execute the queries. Now, not this is these steps are not with respect to this PostgreSQL DB. These steps are common across any DB. Just that this library will change based on your database. If you're using MySQL, that library changes with respect to the MySQL packaging. And if you're using any other database, then you need the respective package. Now, let me just try opening. Let me just say, I hope I have the PostgreSQL. So when you install, you will also get something called pgadmin, which is a admin access user representative tool to execute any of the queries. Okay, let me just open that. This is basically an interface to talk to the DB, right? Apart from using a command line tool, you can also use this to execute any of the queries. Okay, let me just try on the terminal also, or from here itself I can try PSQL, right? For the factory. For the port number, which one did I give? Let's wait for the PG admin to come through. Okay, just a moment. Which one I'm using? Properties. Second, let me check the properties. 5432 localhost. It is running in 5432. This is the IP address. You can give localhost if you're running locally, or you can just give the IP address as 127.0.0.1. So if you're running locally, your IP address would generally be, if your IP would be, you can use local host, or you can use 127.0.0.1. So this is your local IP address. The port by default that the PostgreSQL would be running in is 5432. Okay. By default, you will have a user as Postgres, and password is like, at the time of installation, you would give one password. Remember that password. Write it down, note it down somewhere. Otherwise, without that password, you cannot log in later. Okay. Username would be Postgres, and you have to remember your own password. Okay, all right. So now let me just, so these and all are not important for us to worry. The first thing that is this connection data is important, so you can always use. So as I told, you can have a multiple databases installed, right? Created. So let me just say, let me just go ahead and create. But meanwhile, let me also try from the terminal. Why was I not able to? 543 failed rule. Okay, so this user doesn't have. Okay. 5432 -u Postgres. I'm not going to give because by default it takes the port number. All I'm telling is user. Right now, when I said PSQL-u user, I was able to log into the Postgres terminal. Once you install the Postgres, you will also be able to do it. Okay. Now /dt. If at all, if there are any tables or any databases that are there, this would basically list. Okay, it is saying like, did not find any relations, right? So for now, like, we'll just try to create one database and then one table in it. So what is the syntax for creating a table, database?
Create database name, sir.
Create database name, and followed by you will tell who is the user, right, and all. But let's to keep it simple, you can just say create database. Now I'm going to name this class Python class. This is the DB name that I have given. This is the DB name I have given. Right, create database, DB name. Then you can give a lot of other options also that you can learn using that. Right now, once you have created, if you want to check what are the different database that you have created, /l /l. So does it list Python class as a DB that we just created? Does it list?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. So once it lists, you can use these are all command line terminal /c and connect. Basically, backward /c means connect to this DB Python class. You are now connected to the database Python class as a user Postgres. Now you are able to connect to that database.
Yes, sir.
Agree. Right. So now it says you are able to connect to that database. Right. After connecting to that database, so how do I create a table? So now let me check the DT, like basically describe tables. If you see there are no tables in it, there are no tables in it. Now, how do I create a table? What is the command to create a table?
Create table name followed by columns
Then
and data types.
followed by columns and the respective data types. Yes. Now create table create table, and you have to give the table name. I'm going to give that as a student, right? And within this, okay, hold on a second. It got created. How do you drop a table? Now it got created.
Drop table name, sir.
Okay. Okay. Now slash dt we will check. So there's nothing. Let me do one thing. Let me write this here somewhere where, yeah, I'll just use this to write first. Create table, students, right? ID, ID, and we say integer, and then C, then name, varchar, say 250. Email, the simple DB that we are creating with this basic information, right? Let us just copy this and try to execute it here. Okay. No, it is actually serial, not in the serial. Serial is basically integer only. So let me rerun this. Okay, slash dt. If I check now, it says there is one table, right, which is students, right? Okay, so we have one table called students created. We have one table called students created. Let me just say select star from students. Do we have any data here? Zero rows, right? Basically, it has four columns: ID, name, email, and phone number. And if I say select star from students, because there is no data in it, it is going to give zero rows. Now, how do I insert data into it? How do we
Like
insert
insert
data
into
into
table
page?
name values.
Insert into,
Table name
Table
values.
names.
right? So if you want to see what is what are the columns, right? You just say describe students, and it is going to say, okay, this is the column structure, which is ID, which is integer. Though I gave it as a serial, but serial is treated as an integer, so it takes care of certain sequencing. And then you have name, character varying 250 characters, email 250 characters, phone number 250 characters. So this you can describe that and check, right? Then insert into table name. What is our table name? Students, right? Now on what all columns I'm going to insert this? Name, email, and phone number. What are the values that I'm inserting? So the name is Raj, email is raj@gmail.com, and password is, let's say, test at 123, right? Sorry, phone number, right? Not password, sorry. Right, so this is it. Now we are able to insert. Hold on a second, I have to use a single quote. Okay, so now we are able to insert. Now, if I have to again check, was this inserted properly? Yes, it does say insert 01, which means it is able to, it did insert successfully. And let us see if it did insert, select star from students should basically give us that data. Is it getting that data?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Right, we are able to, we did create a database. We created a DB, then we created a table, right? We created a database, we connected to that database, then within that database we created the table, and within that we were able to insert the data, and then we are able to retrieve that data. So how do I update this here?
Update
How do we
table name,
update?
set column name and where conditions.
Update table name,
Table name.
set column name. What, let us say for email, I want to change .com, where ID equal to 1. In the quotation marks, it all uses a single quotation marks for the PG, right? Now let us see from raj@gmail.com, it should have got raj@abc.com. So did it get updated?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. So these are the, like, basic SQL commands. These are the basic SQL commands. Now the same operation. So now we are doing here through a SQL shell. Okay. Now some command line tool we are using this. Now we will try to do the same operations using a Python library, using a Python library or a Python package. And which is the package that we have used? Which is the package that we should be using, or we will be using to deal with the PostgreSQL? Which is the package name that we just installed?
PyCops G.
PsycopG. Remove this here. Import. Right. Let us try to execute this to see if this is working well. Right. Okay, it should be psycopg, not import psycopg.binary. Why is that? Psycopg 2-binary, which is the package that we did install. Let me just check the, let me exit. So /q is the way you exit. Pip. We install the right one. We have to install psycopg 2.2-binary. Okay, not psycopg-binary, psycopg 2-binary. Okay, this is the package that we need to install. And now let us try, and let us do quick freeze again. So if you see here, right, so psycopg binary, psycopg 2-binary. So let's uninstall the psycopg 2-binary. Pip install psycopg binary and install it. Done. Now let us check the quick freeze again. So we have the psycopg 2-binary, right? And after this should work. Okay, no module named psycopg. Not necessary that I should be using 2. Yeah, so it works with the 2. Okay, I reran it. Okay, we are able to successfully install, and we are able to import it properly. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to connect to the database. We want to connect to the database, right? How can we connect? Right. So for the connect, in order to connect to a particular database, psycopg2 library or the psycopg2 module will have a function called connect. Will have a function called connect. So in order to connect, what all we need? We need database name. What is the database name that we just created? Python class, is that the DB that we created?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Right.
sir.
What is the user? By default, which is the user I told? Postgres is the
Postgre.
user that you have by default. So I think for my um, password, I'm going to use this as a password. Okay. And I want to know what is the IP address. I'm just going to call it as DB host. Since I'm going to connect to the local, I'll be using localhost. Okay. And what is the port number? We have 5432 as a port number. Okay, so we all need, so for first thing is like, we need to have all of this information, Now, what we are going to do is connection is equal to psychobj2 dot connect. Now, when I'm trying to connect, right, it requires all of this information. What is the DB name? What is the DB name? I'll just show you the parameters, right? Before that, let me just go to this. Okay, it needs a lot of information, which is what is the DB name, what is the user, what is the password. So by default, if you don't provide the host name and the port, it will take that as a local host and the port is as a 5432, right? You can also provide. So these are all the important information that you need. Copy it. Let me just go back to this. Right, if you want to get into that, just hold control button and then hover onto that function. Just click on it. It will navigate it to that function. Okay. All right. Now connect. If you have to connect, right? So you need to have certain information. Now, what is the DB name? Second. DB name is equal to DB underscore name. Okay, we have already created that in all the variables above. Okay, then DB name. After that, what you want is a user. What you want is a user. Who is the user? Right, DB user. After that, what you want is you got a user. You want a password. Now DB password. Right, now let us try to give the host. Then you have port. Print connection. If there is a connection, then print connected successfully. Else print connection failed. Okay, now let us try to run this. So this is our DB object and it is able to connect, and hence we have this connected successfully message, which means programmatically from Python, we were able to connect to the database, right? And once you are able to connect to the database, you can always, right? Now, if we can always execute queries and so on, right? Now, after getting the connection object, what is the second most important thing that you have to do? You got the connection object. And what is the next thing? There are 4 steps I told, right? First, you need to collect this information. Step 1 done. Step 2, you should be able to get that respective package done. Step 3, you should be using this connect function to connect to the database. That is also done. What is the third step that I told? You need to create a cursor object. Which can help us to execute the queries. Cursor is equal to connection. The cursor would be on the connection object. Cursor. Now I have to use this cursor object dot execute, right? Execute. Select star from students. So I can execute this. And after this, it is going to return certain response. The select star from students is going to return certain response. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right? So let us see. We'll try to get that information. We'll try to get that information. So one created a cursor, then executing that, right? And whenever you open a connection, you should ensure that you should close the connection also. You should ensure that you should close the connection also. Right. After that, so first let us try to get the data. Data is equal to cursor dot. I'm going to use a function called fetch all, which is going to take all the responses. Take all the responses. I'll go into details of it, but for now, just understand. Right? Okay. So you got for data, for D in data. I'm just going through. It is a list of the records. It is going to return a list of rows. Let me call it instead of data. Let me call it as a rows. Right? Rows. It will return all the rows. I'm going to say print D. Right? And let me execute this. Right? So this is the database data that we had inserted.
Yes, sir.
We just inserted one record and it is returning one record. We'll also try to insert more records and see what it does. Now, every time you open a connection, you should ensure that you should close the connection also. Now the connection, right, you have opened it. Now after that, you should just say connection dot close. Always, whenever you open a file, you close the file. Now, whenever you open a connection, we should ensure that we close the connection, right? We should not leave the connection as is. You should ensure that you close the connection as well. Are we clear?
Yeah, clear, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's execute it again to see if this is what it is. Right now, after this, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to insert one more record. Cursor dot execute, right? Insert into students. Insert into students. You remember the insert command, right? Name, email, phone number, right? Values is I'm going to use a single quote. What is the email? Phone number, and that's it. Right? We are good. We did insert. So insert into string, and I'm going to close the string, and that's it. This is what we are trying to insert. Now cursor dot execute. Cursor, whenever we are inserting, right? Whenever we are inserting, we should ensure that we commit that. We commit that change. That is when it gets inserted into the DB. I said not cursor, the committing should be connection. Connection dot commit, and then we will be able to insert that data. And I am going to re-execute this again to see what will be the records. What will be the records? All right, let me execute this. Right, and between this, I'm going to print. Right, inserted record. Now instead of a previous execution, we inserted one record with certain name. Now in the present execution also we are inserted as the same data, inserted the same data. If you want every execution, you can just say name is equal to input of enter name right? Name ID, which is email ID. And then you have your phone number. Enter, enter phone. So we will use this here. Okay, so every time we run, we'll just right, enter a name. Tell me name. Moment, for example, email, phone number. Right. Now, after that, we did run get query. Right? Did it insert the new record that we just inserted? Are we able to get that record?
Yes, sir.
Right, to validate, let me
Yes,
check
sir.
here. Right, let me check here. Let me reload this, refresh this. It will list the Python class. Let me open that Python class. Right, and let me just go to schemas, and you will have under schemas, you'll have something called tables. Right, we got a student, and let me just right, yeah. So here also we will check. This is a psycho PG admin, basically help. It's an interface that lets us talk to the DB. Okay, select a star from students. Let us see what is the response that it is going to give. Right, we just inserted Mumin, and then we have that record. Then we have that record. Yes. Right, so this is a
Yes, sir.
simple way. So now this is a simple way, like, there are quite a lot of other functions which we'll go through, but these are the primary steps. These are the primary steps. Okay. Now, if you want to connect to the database, you should know certain information, which is what is the database name, what is the DB username, and what is the password for it, and what is the host. You can either give local on your local, you can give local host or 127.0.0.1. They both are one and the same. They both are one and the same. Right. So now you're able to insert that record as well, which means either you can, if you want to interact or talk to the database which is installed locally, you can use localhost or 127.0.0.1 as an IP address. They both are one and the same. And the port number, on which port your database is running, on which port your database is running. You need this information first. Okay. And once you know that information, based on your database, you need to install that respective package. Now, the database that we have installed is PostgreSQL. And in order to talk to the PostgreSQL, we have installed a library called psycobg2-binary, which is compatible with the PostgreSQL library. See, PostgreSQL DB. Right. Once that is done, you are good to execute. Now, after doing the pip install psycobg2-binary, I'm able to insert the import that respective package, and then used a connect function that from that package, right? Which, see, if you just hover on this, right, in your editor is basically giving certain documentation. This connect function helps us to connect to the database. Once it connects to the database, it returns that connection object. It returns that connection object. So since that connection object is returned, we are storing that connection object in a variable called con. Right? And once after that, once your connection object is ready, once your connection object is available, you can use a cursor method in order to execute certain queries. Either it might be select query, insert query, delete query, or update query, or create query. So anything, right? You need a cursor object. So cursor object can be obtained on the connection object. Cursor object is available in a connection class. Here, this connect will return a connection object, which is the connection classes object. And in the connection class, you have a cursor method, and we have got the cursor object. It returned a cursor object. Once you get the cursor object, you can use the execute function to execute the queries. You can use the execute function to execute queries. For example, here we did select star from students. Right now, this is going to return more than one record, right? This is going to return more than one record, right? I'm just not saying limit or anything. Just say select star from students. It is going to return more than one record, more than one row. And I'm returning or storing all those records into a variable called rows. And I'm iterating through that rows to print each row. And after that, we are using the same cursor object to execute. And here we have a insert command. In the previous, we had a select command. Here we have an insert command. And whenever you insert or update any record into the DB, ensure that you have to commit. And if you want to commit that change to the DB, right, you need to use a function called commit. And that commit function is again available in the connection object. That's why we said connection.commit. And after that, again, I'm executing a query to see, like, if this inserted record is available in the DB. Yes, we saw that it was available. Now, once every time you open a connection, you should always ensure that you close the connection as well. You should always ensure that you close the connection as well. And we call this close function, close method in the connection object. And that's it. And after that, once you have closed, and if you try to use this connection object, this is going to throw an error, right? Because connection object is already closed. Okay, fine. Uh, right. So cursor is already closed, right? You cannot, right? We cannot run this query after this, right? Once you close, you cannot execute any of the statements. So anything that you want to execute, you should execute that before closing. You should execute that before closing.